so the opportunity, and it is an opportunity, we might see it as a problem, but there's this opportunity that we get to shift our beliefs, we get to change our beliefs, because everything that we're seeing in our reality, like every single thing that we're seeing, is an amalgamation of a few things, but mostly it's how do we perceive we have to live life? How do we perceive things are going to go? How do we perceive, I don't know, the results for absolutely anything? And I'm going to share with you this funny but also real story, and just to give you an example of exactly this. So I've had a client sign up to work with me on a couple of soul mapping sessions. So he wanted them 6 weeks apart, and so he signed up to one, he signed up to another one 6 weeks like after, and he signed up to another one 6 weeks after, and we pre-organized that. So he said, that's what I want the pack a punch, like the hour and a half and the clearing and everything that you do. I've got dough all over me. I just realized I got dough all over me because I've been making dough, sourdough stuff to make a pastry, like a pie later. So he signed up for these three. We had the first session, moved absolute mountains, signed up for the, like, jumped into the second session. As he jumped into the second session, he said, I'm a little flustered today. And I just said, is there anything you want to talk about? You know, I'm not going to obviously cover topics that don't need covering for the client. And I don't need to know everything either, as you guys know. And he said, oh yeah, my wife's a bit upset. She has her period. And I just thought at the time, I was like, oh, it's interesting that she has her period and she's upset. That's all I thought. And I said, is there anything you want to talk about there? And he's like, no, let's talk about this. Let's focus on this. Let's clear this. This is my focus. Because I don't know, I get people to fill out questionnaire and things like that beforehand too. So we're really structuring the call and moving the call and shifting inside the call, I should say. So interestingly, it came up again in conversation. And this is just an example of millions of examples, but something that might be just, I don't know, maybe it's really common in your world. It's not common in my world, but it's really common for some people. And that's totally cool. It can be somewhat controversial, but sometimes I like being polarizing because we don't know what we don't know. We all have blind spots, and we all believe whatever we see is 100% gospel. And then we surround ourselves with situations, circumstances, people that continuously prove these beliefs for us. And these beliefs can be on a really massive scale, or they can be on a really minor scale. So that's why I thought this would be a really good one to use. So it came up again in the conversation, and I said to him, like, just hypothetically, because we were talking about beliefs, I said, if you believed, and there was an aspect about his relationship that had come up. I said, if you believed that your wife by default behaves a certain way because she is a fucking woman, she bleeds like women are supposed to. Well, you know, in this case, I get not all women do, but there is that potential for it, right? You understand what I'm saying inside that. So her feminine essence, part of her feminine essence just occurred. And because it just occurred, it automatically meant she was going to be cranky. I was just trying to put the simplicity inside it for him, like, go, hey, this is like, let's look at this on sort of a biological factor and like a simplistic factor, like the, you know, sun is going to rise, the sun is going to set, like that type of thing. Therefore, it means someone has to be cranky, and she's allowed to be cranky anyway, right? Like, who gives a shit if she's cranky? But I said, if that were true for you, what would you notice in your life? And he's like, well, I'd notice that she was cranky. And I said, has there been a time where you haven't even known that she's had her period? Like, just hypothetically. He's like, yeah. I said, did you think she was cranky then? He's like, well, no, probably not. He's like, he was just like thinking about it then. So I just said to him, you know, you can change the belief or you cannot, but let's use this as an example of that harmonious relationship that you're supporting, and that you're also calling in for yourself right now. He said, let's just shift the belief in that regard. Like, let's call it whatever you want to call it. I said, how would you like to reframe it? And so he did a few things on reframing. He couldn't write 10, so you know how it goes. He wrote 20 different beliefs, and we did a bit of clearing on it. And he said, like, it's only been one cycle since. Yes, I know it's a crazy topic, weird topic, but it's such a good topic at the same time. Anyway, I said to him in the next call, he said, "You not believe it, Lissy." I'd forgotten about it. He said, "You not believe it, Lissy." I said, what happened? And he said, you know, he rattled off all these things, but he said, my wife wasn't cranky. And I realized that I had, when she had a period, and I realized that I had been provoking her. I realized that I automatically thought that. And he said, I actually stopped and reflected on my behavior that sort of prompted her to feel triggered. He said, you know, whether she responds a certain way or not, she was just like, oh, why are we going through this again? And she was a bit irritated by it. And I took that as, you know, this thing. And he just said, I started to see how this played out. He also then started saying about a couple other things around finances, around his fitness, around his confidence at work. And he just said, I noticed these beliefs too. I've been able to just come back as this observer a little bit more, as opposed to being sucked into the vortex of the reality that's going on, and just stepping back and going, hey, what would I want this to look like? What would I like this to be like? And I was like, there is your mother freaking power, right? That's your power. And you were open enough to go there. Like, you were open enough to sort of challenge those beliefs, even on something that sounded really trivial, and like, why are we even talking about this? And, you know, it was maybe 3 minutes of the whole hour and a half, but it moved absolute mountains, because it was just simply an example of how we can box the world, box ourselves, the world into a certain belief. Now, you know, just before somebody gets upset by this and, you know, well, does that mean I don't have this? Does that mean I don't have that? Or, you know, I'm calling this in, like, as in an experience that you're having. I don't necessarily think that's true, right? I think it's in the eye of the beholder. So I'm not going to say, yes, you have just definitely 100% called it in, it's your karma and blah, blah, blah. All I'm asking you to do here is simply soften your viewpoint and your perspective on the way things should go, and therefore the way things you've wired into your body, your mind, your soul, your action. It's just like, by default, you don't even know you're doing it, like any habit. By default, you're starting to run with something. You're starting to run with a certain behavior, because by default you have that belief locked in. And what happens if you start to change that belief? like with anything, like you guys are doing it on so many levels. What happens if you start to change that belief? And you don't have to change that belief, but perhaps you could just invite the question in, well, what if it were different? What if it were different? What if it did feel different? What if this was fun? And what if this was about connection? And what if this was about abundance? Or what about if this was love, or whatever it might be? And what would I be believing then? And all I'm asking you to do is just to change your mind a little bit. Just like for 1 second, just explore, like, be a bit curious. What could it be? Be a little bit curious, be a little bit open. And, you know, you start to move mountains over time. You start to just shift things really subtly. And you're like, huh, I'm not experiencing that anymore. Or I haven't seen this show up in my life anymore. Where did that go? And it's not because you've done anything per se. It's just simply you have claimed that power back for you. You have started to realize that you do have a say in what shows up in your life. You do have a say in how things show up in your life. And that's not a blame game. That's not like everything is on your shoulders. That's simply an opportunity to get really, really curious and start to lead. Be that conscious leader of your life. There's always going to be crazy things going on, or lots of things going on. Like, you're always going to have pressures, and you're always going to have, you know, life occurrences going on. But you can still be curious inside all of that. Like, you're not wrapped up in cotton wool once this happens. You feel more deeply, in fact, probably, like, than you have. I can't, you know, say for sure because I'm not in your body, but you feel more most of the time, like you feel more deeply and more intently, and you are more confident. It's the confidence you didn't even know you needed. You might think you already were, and maybe you already were, but it's like this confidence from this place of absolute trust, because you're not avoiding what's going on. You're not avoiding the feelings, not avoiding situations. You're not leaving everything like, you know, that's happening, let me give all my power away to that. It's like, oh yeah, you start to step back and become that observer. It's happening, and that's interesting. And if, you know, I can't change the fact that that's happened right now, but if I would just simply like to shift something, get curious about, could it be different next time? Could it be different? Does it even have to be a next time? Could I change my mind on this a little bit, and just start to like shift those building blocks a little bit, like just like loosen them a little bit, let some of the rubble sort of crumble off a little bit, and let them fall down a bit, and create that space. So you're holding that space for new possibilities, new opportunities, new ways of living, and new ways of perceiving you and your life. Try that on.